Good afternoon, everyone. Let me welcome you to the next online event organized by the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This is Viktor Eszterhai, a Senior Research Fellow at IFAT, and I will be the moderator of today's discussion. The title of today's event is Brazil, Geopolitics and Foreign Policy, Two Challenges for the 21st Century. The event is inspired by the fact that the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, will be on a state visit to Hungary the coming days. President Bolsonaro is often featured in the Western and I would say also the Hungarian media, however, typically in an extremely one-sided way. So in many cases, even for the experts, it's hard to look beyond the media noise. For all of these reasons, I decided to discuss the Bolsonaro era and the challenges facing Brazil today with an expert who has a deep knowledge on the important social, economic, and domestic political forces that are necessary to position Bolsonaro's political role in today's Brazil. So therefore, our guest today is Dr. Nuno Morgado, who is an assistant professor at Corvinus University of Budapest, Institute of International Political and Regional Studies. He is also a professor in geopolitical studies at the Institute of Political Studies, Charles University in Prague, and he used to be an external associate researcher, Department for Government and Public Policy at the Hungarian Academy of Social Sciences. And not to mention that he was a visiting research fellow at the University of Vienna, Moscow State Institute of International Relations, Sao Paulo University, and also at Comenius University. He is specialized in geopolitical studies, and his research covers I would say an eclectic range of fields connected to the discipline, theory and methodology, geopolitical studies, strategic studies, foreign policy analysis, diplomatic and also military history. In his research, he places a special emphasis on geopolitics and geopolitical traditions of Brazil. And beyond his rich affiliation, I must also say to the audience that our guest is a very good friend of mine. We have been colleagues for several years, so the tone of the conversation today will be therefore a bit friendlier than usual. Before passing the floor to Nuno, I will quickly outline the agenda of our event today. First, I will ask our speaker to give his presentation in around 30 to 40 minutes, and this will be followed by questions from me and also from the audience. So I would like to ask the audience to raise their questions in writing in the chat function of Zoom by clicking Q&A button. So nothing remains, just I would like to give the opportunity to my friend Nuno to take his presentation. Nuno, please, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Viktor, for such kind words and such a warm welcome. It's really nice, and I'm always happy to work with you, as you know. So without further ado, I will just start. So distinct colleagues, audience and guests, I would like to start by thanking Viktor for the invitation extended to me to come virtually to the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade to share some of my research results about Brazil. And as Viktor already said, the timing is particularly relevant, having into consideration the upcoming visit of President Jair Bolsonaro to Budapest in a few days' time. So, the aim of my talk today is to unpack two bands or two clusters, if you prefer, of challenges for Brazil in the 21st century. The first cluster is composed by domestic challenges with security, education, and economic problems. And the second cluster corresponds roughly to an international challenge that Brazil faces, meaning the substance of the country's orientation to either the sea or the land. In this way, the structure of my speech will start first from the description of these two clusters of challenges, to then proceed to the examination of the objectives that Bolsonaro proposed in his electoral campaign or electoral program. Then I will contrast these objectives with the modalities of action that Bolsonaro also referred to. And I will finally conclude by listing a few empirical facts about Brazil's political and societal context thus far. So let's start. First cluster of challenges, domestic challenges. So the knowledge about this topic, I would argue, can be acquired with the political, social, and economic contextualization of Brazil in the last 2 decades. Brazil suffers from the following severe domestic problems, in my view. Security problem, second, an educational problem, and third, economic problems. So let's go through them with some detail. First, the security problem. Brazil has an intentional homicide rate ranging about an average between 50 to 55,000 assassinated people per year in the last decades. For example, in 2016, it reaches 62,000. So this is a soaring homicide rate, as everyone would understand. To compare this number, this is roughly the number of casualties in Iraq war for the entire period of the war. The difference is that this happens every year in a country which is supposed to be in peace. In addition to this, Brazil has also problems with kidnapping and extortion, drug trafficking and consumption, and a very high number of robberies. Bolsonaro's administration has been reducing crime effectively. That is true and accurate. However, there is still a very long way to go. The second problem is the educational problem. Meaning by this, Brazil has a very high level of functional illiteracy. And we must understand that this lack of literacy and lack of education for ethics and for becoming responsible citizens can also be traced as a cause for the traditionally high levels of corruption that characterize Brazil since decades. Again, data shows that since Bolsonaro assumed the presidential office, corruption has been decreasing, but there are still corruption in many levels of the state in very high, to not say unacceptable levels. Coming back to the educational problem, stricto sensu, a 2017 study based on data from the Ministry of Education of Brazil reported that only 55% of Brazilian 8-year-old children demonstrated sufficient, that means not good or very good, proficiency in reading and writing. So put it in poor terms, there is a large percentage of the population that reads but cannot understand what they read. The third problem is a very serious economic problem. It is connected to the fact that Brazil suffered in recent years the worst recession in a century, mainly caused by corruption schemes in which trillions of reais, Brazilian currency, were stolen by leftist officials from public funds. In spite of Bolsonaro's attempt to liberalize the economy, according to the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, Brazil is still in the category mostly unfree. In January 2017, the Brazilian Federal Police disclosed that the public treasury had been looted by leftist officials to the tune of around 8 trillion reais. 8 trillion. And according to the International Monetary Fund, the country's GDP that year was 6.6. So the money stolen from the public treasury was more than the GDP produced in the entire year. Also connected to the economic problem is the scarcity and or the bad shape of the lines of communication. The network of roads and railways in Brazil is deeply underdeveloped, which harms the integration of the territory and consequently harms also the participation of the country in the international trade. But this, I believe, is a topic for another conference on its own. So moving on, I would suggest address now the second cluster of challenges, which is actually located in the intercross between international and domestic factors. So the second cluster of challenges of Brazil, as I see it, is connected to the matching or realignment of the perceptions of space of the Brazilian elites and their ambitions and intentions with the Brazilian people, which, like any other people in the world, aims to have national independence and prosperity. The South American regional integration, which is a continentalization strategy, has been the priority for the Brazilian decision makers for many years already. However, research results, not only from my own research, but also other scholars, research results show that the South American integration has not only been disarticulating Brazil's national sovereignty and consequently Brazil's national interests for international projection, but this priority for the South American integration has also received muscle from the São Paulo Forum. Since its foundation in 1990, the São Paulo Forum is an international organization that has been connecting national leftist political parties of all South American countries with criminal organizations, such as the FARC in Colombia or the MIR from Chile. The São Paulo Forum has a final goal of creating a socialist bloc in South America. In Portuguese, this is called a Pátria Grande, or in English, the Great Bolivarian Fatherland. In other words, this South American integration as a political maneuver has been diverting Brazil's efforts from solving its domestic problems, and I just pointed some of them, and consequently, it diverted efforts towards an objective of national projection of power in the international arena. Instead of that, Brazil has been pursuing, the way I see it, a self-damaging continentalization project. And that is why, again, in my view, the over and over proclaimed takeoff of Brazil never happened. This objective of South American integration that we are talking about at this moment is included in very relevant documents, such as the Brazilian Constitution itself. This is the number 4 of Brazil's Constitution. It claims that it's then the objective of the state. And also in other crucial strategic documents, such as the 2020 White Book for National Defense, in which it is claimed with all the letters that the South American integration remains the crucial objective for Brazil. So what does this mean? This means that Bolsonaro's administration did not change that geopolitical continuity of the South American integration, either because President Bolsonaro did not want to change that, or because he does not understand the importance of that change, or because he could not change. And why? Because great part of the political class, of the judiciary system, of the state's bureaucracy, of the educational system, of the mass media, of the show business, and even part of the hierarchy in the Catholic Church and in the army, they are against President Bolsonaro and his administration. So Bolsonaro at the moment counts only with the support of the majority of the nation. Yes, it's true. But this support of the majority of the nation is dispersed and liquid when compared to the organized opposition of the mentioned structures, both in politics and society. An alternative to this South American integration for Brazil could be a sea power agenda, as the Brazilian geopolitician Terezinha de Castro defended already many decades ago, among other scholars like Professor Delgado Carvalho. And this power agenda means investing in maritime power projection and also to give priority to alliances with maritime countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, etc. However, if the current variables and the context do not change, I am convinced that that is very unlikely to happen, and this South American integration is a geopolitical continuity that is not going to be changed. So if this is the context, I would now like to offer you an overview about the objectives and modalities of action of Bolsonaro's electoral program. So if these were the problems, what did Bolsonaro offer as both objectives and modalities of action as solution? Among the straightforward objectives that Bolsonaro identified were one, and I'm quoting, to return the country to the Brazilians, and this means implying to reinforce the sovereignty of the people over political structures, and two, and I'm quoting, to rebuild the fatherland, setting it free from the yoke of corruption, organized crime, economic irresponsibility, and ideological submission, end of quote. So we see in these two objectives that they largely react to the problems that I previously identified. The projection of Brazil on the international arena seemed to be a decisive objective for Bolsonaro's administration as well, as reflected by the following statements. Quote, to make Brazil conquer a spotlight in the world and to bring peace and prosperity to the Brazilian people, end of quote. And, quote, more than to defend the fatherland, we want to make the fatherland great, end of quote. This latter objective that I just mentioned is directly connected to security and political objectives. Taking into consideration the mentioned internal security problems in Brazil, it is unsurprising to note that Bolsonaro established the objectives of eradicating crime, corruption, infiltration of leftist officials in the state structures, and fighting against drug trafficking, which has been managed by FARC in South America. While signing the arms decree, one of the first measures of Bolsonaro's administration, the President Bolsonaro affirmed that the objective with that law, with that decree, was to make sure that, and I'm quoting, the citizen may, in this first moment, have peace inside of his home, end of quote. Concerning the political system, the objective is either to reinforce or revitalize the democratic system, thus guaranteeing individual rights and freedoms. This is what the program was stating. Let's see that the empirical reality is a little bit different in the last section of our talk. On the external front, the new Brazilian administration seemed to be very much aware of the threat being posed by the São Paulo Forum's initiatives, and said the program, quote, we will stand up against São Paulo Forum that weakens our democratic institutions since its foundation in 1990, end of quote, stated Bolsonaro. The point was also, quote, setting the nation free from the alliance between cultural Marxism and its branches, like Gramscism, that is hegemonic in Brazil for the last 30 years, with corrupt oligarchies, end of quote. Although the objective, it is urgent to eradicate the ideology that defends criminals and criminalizes the police force, as Bolsonaro stated, was not mentioned in connection to the São Paulo Forum, it is a fact that that organization has gathered and supported criminal organizations in the past under the Gramscian directive of using crime as a political tool. Consequently, eradicating this ideology that defends criminals, to use Bolsonaro's words, implied also to fight against São Paulo Forum and its existence. Further objectives on foreign policy from Bolsonaro's political program included to defend the country's sovereignty, build greatness, and develop Brazil. Finally, it was also declared that an agenda should be set for the Mercosur, so the Southern Common Market, and the objective was, quote, open up Brazil to international trade, to reduce tariffs, to eliminate bureaucracy, to conclude ongoing negotiations, and to open new negotiations, end of quote. In regard to education and culture, President Bolsonaro stated that he aims to, quote, unite the people, to appreciate families, to respect religious and our Judeo-Christian tradition, to fight against gender ideology, and to conserve our values, end of quote. And he also invited to bring, quote, bring back ethical and moral standards to public and private life, end of quote. Finally, in the economic area, in contrast to the socialist guidelines of the past decades, the economic policy of Brazil's new administration is a free market-oriented one. Among the leading economic objectives were economic growth, job creation, control of the inflation, development of infrastructure, reduction of unemployment, and I'm quoting, making laws, life, private property, and the Constitution respected, end of quote. The other objectives were to guarantee macroeconomic stability, open up Brazil to international trade, as we have seen concerning Mercosur, put Brazil among the top 50 best countries for business, and to defend and to help to reform the WTO. In the speech that Bolsonaro gave in the World Economic Forum in Davos, he added that Brazil is in very big need of technology to explore the resources and also to develop the economic structure of the country. So if these were the objectives, how was the mean to achieve these objectives plasmed or stated in the electoral program? So this is what we are going to see next. Having identified the objectives, we may now go into the inquiry of how the administration indicated is going to achieve them. And this is a crucial methodological stage because the answer to this question determines whether or not plans for the concentration of political power exist. The critical idea is that it is impossible to achieve revolutionary objectives without a strong statistic or state force to exert pressure on the society, taking into account that the demands for overwhelming political, military, and economic superiority are a necessity to achieve deep changes, such as militarization of the society, standardization of values and beliefs, or imposition of an equal economic status, like any other hardcore socialist policy would determine. It is therefore pertinent to ask, did Bolsonaro propose to concentrate and enlarge the power of the state? Well, the bottom line in both Bolsonaro's program of government and his first speech in the parliament was, and I'm quoting, "I intend to share the power in a progressive, responsible, and conscious way from Brasilia to Brazil, from the central power to states and municipalities." Hence, contrary to the deepening of the decades-long process of centralization of power, President Bolsonaro expressed the intention of reducing the extent of central powers of states through a decentralization process. Sorry. That constitutes the conservative modality of action of a limited state, classical in political science, if nothing else, at least as a professed modality of action. So we shall now proceed to the symmetric study concerning politics, security, education and culture, and economy, but having into consideration the modalities of action. In regard to security and politics, apart from the modality of action of decentralization of power that I have already mentioned, President Bolsonaro stated that in order to reduce those homicides, robberies, kidnappings, and other crimes, it is necessary, one, to reinforce the capabilities of the police, in technology, equipment, intelligence, etc. 2, to keep the criminals in jail, not to facilitate their release. 3, to reduce the legal age to go to court to 16 years old. 4, to liberalize the weapons market, which, as we have seen, was one of the first measures of the government. 5, to grant legal protection to policemen in carrying out their law enforcement functions. 6, to categorize the invasions of private property in the countryside and the cities as terrorism. 7, to remove from the Constitution any restraints that harm the value of private property. And 8, to defend the victims of violence and not criminals. Bolsonaro added that the coordination between the central power and governors and mayors, therefore, once again, trying to reduce the extent of central power of the states through a decentralization process, would be promoted. And the motto of the government has been more Brazil, less Brasilia. So that means more power distributed throughout the country and less power concentrated in the capital, and therefore in the central government. That would also ensure better control of the people over the local politicians, making democratic mechanisms stronger. Reduction of the bureaucracy, the number of ministries, and the state machinery are also modalities of action identified in the government program. All these constitute clearly a set of modalities of action of a limited state in a conservative sense. With regard to foreign affairs, Bolsonaro's government program and electoral program declared that, and I'm quoting, international trade should be done with countries that can help Brazil to improve its technology and its economy, that assassin dictatorships will no longer be praised, and that Brazil will stop attacking democracies like the United States, Israel, and Italy, end of quote. That Brazil will continue to, quote, integrate with the Latin American brothers who do not live under dictatorships, end of quote, and that there will be a preference for bilateral relations and agreements. Just a small note here concerning Latin American integration, which, as I have just read here, continues to be a geopolitical continuity present in the speech of the president and hence of his administration. So it didn't change, as I claimed a while ago. Finally, the government program assured that not only is the law to be enforced, and thus the Constitution to be respected, but that judicial investigations will not and should not be stopped. In the parliament, Bolsonaro asked for support for the required policies, declaring that the parliament is to be respected and praised, but it also needs to restore its credibility and respectability and to listen to the people, his words. Furthermore, he stated that our objectives will only be achieved by a true national pact between the society and the executive, legislative, and judiciary. So therefore, separation of powers, that democracy must be respected and that transparency must be above all. In regard to education, culture, and values, although the new Brazilian administration at the time aimed to bring about a cultural transformation in which impunity, corruption, crime, favors, and artifice would no longer be accepted in the government, and that there would be no more, this aspect would be no more part of the national identity, the fact is that the government can do very little to change that out of the strict governmental circle. And it seemed that President Bolsonaro understood that when he said to the people, and I'm quoting, "I call upon you in that direction, that we and our families all together can restore moral and ethical standards that will transform our country," end of quote. In regard to the economy, The modalities of action included the control of expenses or a balanced budget, the reorganization of the Ministry of Economy, aimed at reducing the number of public servants in this sphere too, reduction of taxes and interest rates, privatization of companies, opening up of the country to the international trade, decentralization of the tax system and making the tax system effective in fighting fiscal evasion, creation of a new system for social security, and creation of a special service to open and to close businesses in 30 days. That is obviously and beyond any doubt a fiscally conservative agenda. In spite of that, there are also more interventionist modalities of action to be pointed out, such as taking steps towards establishing a minimum wage in Brazil, equal or superior to the famous Bolsa Familia, or renewing and expanding Brazil's maritime ports, such as Santos, and also connecting them to the network of rivers, roads, and railways that I already mentioned are very incipient. Although, furthermore, it is not clear whether this latter development was supposed to be private or public. The last section of text that I would like to share with you, it's some 4 empirical facts about Brazil's political and social context today. And this has the clear intention to challenge those who claim that Brazil has been facing a muscled increase of power from the side of Bolsonaro's administration, because the empirical facts show exactly the opposite. So the first fact is that most of the conservative people have been expelled from Bolsonaro's government. Ricardo Vélez Rodrigues and Abraham Weitraub, who were ministers of education, Ricardo Salles, who was the Minister of Environment, but the most paradigmatic case, I would say, was certainly Ernesto Araújo, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was removed from his office due to a double internal and external pressure. The second fact is that in addition to what I have just said, so the government has been filtered from conservative elements and filled in either with technocrats or with military. So in addition to that, supporters of Bolsonaro have been strongly persecuted by the judicial system, as they were, or they still are, political prisoners. Several examples. Sarah Winter, who tried to organize a structure of pro-Bolsonaro activists and was arrested. Alan dos Santos, who is a journalist exiled in the United States. Daniel Silveira, who is a member of the parliament, who is still in jail, as far as I know. And also Robert Jefferson, who is a senator of the regime, pro-Bolsonaro activist, who was also arrested. There are many other cases, such as the journalist Osvaldo Eustáquio, who is a pro-Bolsonaro journalist. He was also arrested and he became paraplegic in the jail. And this is just a few cases among dozens that I could list here. So in other words, and this is the main point, the supporters of a government who is in power are political prisoners, and the government remains indifferent to these circumstances, which is a very odd political situation. The third fact is that Bolsonaro faces a thick confrontation inside of the state, for example, from the judicial system, the high sphere of the judicial system, and also from part of the organized civil society, for example, the Association of Lawyers, the Association of Defense, etc. So furthermore, Bolsonaro does not have a political party, and he does not have either a body of activists or militants. So in a word, Bolsonaro lacks a chain of command both inside of the state and outside of the state, which makes his administrative and state position rather weak, which contrasts at the same time with the high levels of approval and popularity demonstrated by the population in the streets over and over again. And the fourth and last empirical fact is this: the incapacity of Bolsonaro to nominate the head of the federal police at his preference, which is a function attributed to the president by the Constitution, against an intervention of one single judge of the Supreme Federal Court, is a symbol and an empirical evidence of how fragile the position of Bolsonaro is. And to conclude, because I don't want to bother you too much, I will suffer for a lack of modesty a little bit, and I'm going to quote myself words that I wrote in 2019 in an article that was published by the Journal of Interdisciplinary Civic and Political Studies, words that throughout the years, they certainly became accurate. So I wrote, it follows that Bolsonaro was elected by the Brazilian people with no comprehensive cultural conservative foundations, but only under anti-corruption and anti-crime slogans. All these variables make the position of the government rather weak and sustain the argument that, all things being equal, the leftist cultural bloc, with a set of leftist political parties as instrument, the latter are moreover engaged internationally in the São Paulo Forum, will easily excavate under Bolsonaro's government. And I will leave it here. I will thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward for the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nuno, for this deep and comprehensive analysis. I also learned a lot from it. First, please let me ask first from Nuno, and then I would like to give, of course, the opportunity also for the audience. So I would have two questions to you. First is somehow connecting to the internal political situation of Brazil. For decades, I was learned one of the major political forces within Brazil was the wealthy landowners and those businessmen who were very much interested in participating in capitalism and also globalization later. But in your analysis, you did not mention this, I would say, social class or these political force. And my question was connected to this, that what is the reason that, are they not relevant anymore, or how do you see the position within the society? And my second question is of course targeting foreign policy. If I understand well your analysis, there are two major forces within Brazil. One is the leftist tradition, which tries to enforce the cooperation within the Latin American states with the promise that they will be less dependent on the capital or global markets, capitalism, global markets. They can decrease the dependency from the wealthy countries, and somehow can provide a more sustainable and more equal society. And for the foreign policy outcome of this is that this necessarily decrease the dependency, especially from the global hegemon or regional hegemon, the United States. The other branch of forces are arguing that it's necessary to cooperate with these major powers or hegemonic powers, because this provides access to capital, technology, and so on. And this is badly needed for Brazil. So if I understand well, from this point of view, what is the situation with China? So in Latin America, one of the biggest elephant now in the room is China. So in many cases, several analyses arguing that it's kind of a game changer situation now in Latin America. And then United States used to dominate Latin America via economic dependency and of course via militaries, blah, blah, and so on. But economy was a core part. And now this economic relationship with China in some countries and also in Brazil is challenging the position of the United States. So my question is pointing to this direction, that how can you identify the role of China within this dimension? Because if I understand well, from a political point of view, it's quite problematic for Bolsonaro and the background of Bolsonaro to support China. But from an economic point of view, this is a kind of a necessity. So I would very much looking for your answers. So please answer these two questions first, and then I would like to give the opportunity then to the audience. So please use the Q&A button in Zoom to raise question in written form. And then I will ask it from Nuno, and let's see what will be his answers. So please, the floor now is yours, and then I would really like to ask the attendees to raise questions to him as well.
Thank you very much, Viktor. Very complex questions, and it's always dangerous to talk about China with you, because you know much more about that country, and I will try to react only from the South American, especially the Brazilian perspective. But first, your first question. So the relevance or irrelevance of the landowners. You are absolutely right. This is one of the cores of not only Brazilian society and economy, but also Brazilian politics. And why do I make that claim? Because in the parliament, the interests gather members of the parliament throughout not only, but also political and economic classes. And one of the groups that exists there in the Brazilian Congress, the parliament, is the soya, the beef, or soya beef, the religious, especially the Protestant, and other types of clusters. So, but I would claim that one of the most important is this soya beef. Soya beef is what? It's the landowner, so it's the production. Brazil is, if not the major producer of food in the world, is definitely the second or the third. So it is much relevant, the production, the agricultural production, which is in the hands of the economic class that you just mentioned. So these landowners, these producers of beef, soya, and other types of grains. So they do have a word to say. And from this statement, I will jump to the second question, which is, this class, this social class, this economic class, is one of the most interested in doing business with China. Because as you know better than me, China has also a shortage in food, and Brazil could supply and cover that, that lack of offer. So if there is some social and economic class that's interested in doing business with China in Brazil, is definitely these landowners and producers of food. Now, let me step back here to reinforce what you claim. You made there a very accurate resume of what I said. So whereas the left, the radical left, has been promising that the integration of South America would put Brazil into the top of, if not the world, at least of the region, what we have seen was not the accomplishment of that promise. And we can speak because this has already been going for decades. It was not the promise, the accomplishment of that promise, but on the other hand, a diminishment of Brazil in, as I said, societal and security terms, educational terms, but perhaps the most visible aspect is the economic terms and the recession. So this takeoff of Brazil that has been promised over and over again for the last decades never happened, and never happened because concerning the economic structure, this money, this millions of dollars and of reais were diverted from the public funds and from an agenda of development of the country to be distributed for or by other countries with ideological or strategic agendas, like to Venezuela, to Cuba, and also out of South America, for example, to Angola. So for ideological reasons, together with strategic purposes of funding radical leftist regimes, again, not only in South America, but also elsewhere, has then been the cause for these economic problems that Brazil has been facing. So once again, the promise of Brazilian status was not only not achieved, but the position of the country was also harmed. Concerning still the relations between Brazil and China, I would claim that for a conservative position, there has been some reaction in the conservative circles against the cooperation with China. But as I also said in my speech, those circles, they are very limited, and they are very limited today more than ever. So what we see from the other sections that support and that they are acting in the government, for example, the military, they are pretty much pro cooperation with China. They don't have any problem. And when they provide advice to President Bolsonaro, and that was very clear in the case of the 5G, the path is go for it and open up to China and do business with China, because we have strategic interests, and the ideological aspect of the question, together with sometimes the moral aspect also of the question, is pushed back. So I hope that I answer your questions.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting for me as a China scholar. So I would like to jump on the first question from the audience. So please, could you clarify how will Auxílio Brazil replace Bolsa Familia and improve the social evaluation of the poorest in need?
Oh, that's a
very... You can also see the question if you jump on the...
there.
If you click on it.
That is a very technical question that unfortunately I am unable to answer at the moment. So I do said that this was part of the electoral program, but my research contrasting what was promised to exactly what was delivered is still to be done, because I'm waiting for the end of the administration. So at this moment, I do not have information or data to see how was this minimum wage implemented, or whether if it was at all, and again, what was the results of this maneuver. And so I must apologize, but I don't have information on that.
This is the answer of a researcher. Okay.
The limits of the job.
The limits of the data. Okay, we can jump on the next question. How does having an international financial institution, the new development bank funded, contribute to Brazil's economy through foreign trade and investment? Is there a measurement of impact assessments or direct benefits?
So I am following your advice, and I'm opening here the chat. Because I'm sorry, I didn't listen to the question, so now I need to read it because I was looking for the chat. How does having an international financial institution, the new development bank, founded contributed to Brazil's economy through foreign trade and investment? Is there a measurement of impact? Well, that's another question that will receive the same answer. So the measurement of the results of the Brazilian administration is still to be done. So I didn't do that research yet. What I came here to talk about today was the context of Brazil in the last decades, what the president offered as objective, and also how did he propose that he was going to achieve. But I hope that the Institute then will invite me next year to come and to talk about exactly these topics that you are addressing. So how was the measurement and the assessment between what was promised and what was achieved? I mentioned only aspects from political science or military or security point of view, which is the aspects that I am foremost interested. For example, the arms decree, or the decreasing of drug trafficking by enforcing the powers of the police. But as for the economic questions, I still need to go through it.
Okay, no problem. I will change the direction of this question. So BRICS is one of the core concepts which was inherited, of course, by Bolsonaro, a cooperation with those rising powers who are able to challenge, or how many argues, making the international system more democratic. I mean, in the sense of having more voice to those to the rising powers. What is the idea of the Bolsonaro government regarding the BRICS cooperation? So how would you evaluate this?
That is a very good question. So the idea, the original idea of BRICS from the Brazilian point of view, and I mean by this Lula's administration, and by extension Dilma Rousseff, but Dilma Rousseff was an appendix of Lula because Lula was the main proponent of the issue, was to align Brazil, to realign Brazil from the axis of the United States and Europe to the Russian-Chinese axis. So that was the idea. So of course that this was painted as a strive for, or a struggle for multipolarity and to balance the influence of the United States. But exactly the point was this, the point was to rebalance against the United States. And in the case of Brazil and the Workers' Party, the PT, this is very clear. With President Bolsonaro, of course, that the situation changes radically in the sense that the relations between Brazil and the United States have been receiving much of privilege, and especially until President Trump abandoned the White House. After President Biden came to the office, the relations cool off a little bit. But until the moment that Trump remained in the White House, this was very, very clear. So this BRICS came, or this strategy of the BRICS came in a second level only after a predominant axis between Brasilia and Washington. Nowadays that the relations cooled off with Biden, as I have already said, of course that there is still some eye towards Russia and China, because we know that in foreign policy things cannot be radically changed from one day to another. So these things, they have certain inertia, and of course that Bolsonaro and his administration still goes in the track of Russia and China. And it's so much so that before Bolsonaro comes here to Budapest, he is going to Moscow in the middle of all of this crisis concerning the Russian-Ukrainian borders and so on and so forth. And even though President Bolsonaro was clearly advised to cancel the trip, or at least to postpone it, having into consideration the strictness or the restrictiveness of the international system, still he ignored that piece of advice and he is traveling to Moscow anyways. So this shows that above the foam of ideologies, there are still real strategic interests that are at stake. And certainly Brazil needs, if not some technology of Russia, at least some political or economic cooperation, and therefore tries to manage the pieces of the chessboard the best way it can.
Okay, I would have one more question regarding to this, and then we will jump to the next question from the audience. What is the perception in Brazil about its relationship with the United States? Is Brazil relevant for Washington, or it is slowly but decreasing? I mean, does it have still a strategic importance for the United States, or but many argues that from the economic point of view, the relationship between China and Brazil is improving. But others also underline that the United States does not really do anything with this. So they don't do too much effort to change the direction of this kind of growing tendency between the further strengthening economic relationship between China and Brazil. So what is Brazil relevant for Washington? What do they do to I would say to attract back Brazil to Washington?
But from the point of view of whom? Of the public opinion in Brazil?
So how do they say, or the elites? What do they think about this relationship?
So both the elites and the Brazilian people in general, they have a very, very thick anti-American sentiment. So it is called the Yankee, the oppressor, the capitalist, the unipolar world, the evil empire, all sorts of terms. I could observe that directly when I was living there and when I was doing research at the University of São Paulo, because the university in Brazil has the capability of multiplying the general feeling for 10 times. So if the general public is anti-American, and if it's 10 times multiplied, you can imagine what is said at the university about the United States. So this type of feeling is certainly a product of this, I think that we can use the term, this indoctrination by the mass media and by the universities themselves, teaching students against the United States, against capitalism, and feeding this anti-American feeling. So after a couple of decades of this, it's obvious that the results could not be different. So of course that there are exceptions to this. There is a liberal elite, liberal/conservative elite in Brazil that it's pretty much in favor of the United States, but this is a minority. This is a minority. Some of this minority has representation in the government, it's true. For example, one of the main aides, or perhaps the chief aide for international relations of President Bolsonaro himself, he's a pro-United States official, Felipe Martins. But again, this is a minority. And also within the sphere of the military, this anti-American sentiment also exists. And this is also perhaps why, or this could also be seen perhaps as one of the factors to explain why this military circle or elite is so much for cooperation with China. Because in their minds, this is also a way to balance the influence of the United States, not only in the region, but also in the world.
Thank you. I will jump on the last question. What is Brazil's opportunity in the terms of sustainable transition? Is the government tapping into the potential of several upcoming industries? So how do you see this? And you cannot say, I don't know because I'm not expert on this. Well, of course, obviously, you know the discourse on these discussions on this issue, yeah, at least in Brazil.
Of course, but this is another question that I would need to investigate thoroughly before I dare to make a statement. Because although sustainable transition has been also part of the banner of the government, we cannot forget that Brazil is one of the exporters of oil. Brazil has been not only exporting oil, but is also looking forward to amplify, to extend its platforms of exploration of oil in the Atlantic Ocean. And therefore, this would need to be contrasted then with an agenda of energy transition and other green aspects. So again, I didn't research on this topic, so this is another challenge for me to later on to come back and to talk about that.
If there are no more questions left, so then I have nothing else to do but to thank to our speaker. It's very much a very interesting presentation, and I really learned a lot with investigating the different aspects of Bolsonaro's presidency. So I really have to say that our discussion was very valuable for today. I would also like to thank to the audience, their participation, and also their activity, so the questions. And please be part of our discussion and events organized by the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the future as well. And stay up to date with our webpage and also with our social media. So thank you again. See you all next time and have a great day. Goodbye.